Welcome to BergKnifeMaking.com. Today we're going to take a look at how to make a knife from one of our stainless steel knife blanks. Now the three blanks that I'm going to use in this video I call the universal stainless blanks, and that's because I left a little bit of meat on the design that allows the end user to kind of personalize the profile. You can design it as a recurve, as a drop point. You can make a little buoy out of it. You know, almost any type of knife that you'd like. These blanks are available in three different sizes: 7-inch overall length, 8 and 9 inches long. They're all 3/16 thick and made out of aeb-l stainless. So first step in the process is just to sketch the knife that you want to end up with. I just use the black magic marker. And then for this project, this is what I came up with. So this would be the blank and the end result for the 7-inch, the blank and the end result for the 8-inch, and the blank and the end result in the 9-inch. Now I'm not going to show you every part of every knife being built. I'm just going to use these three randomly throughout the build. So the first step in the process is to profile the blade as you would like it. Now I'm doing this on a 2x72 grinder. It's a Origin blade maker, 2 horsepower, variable speed. I'm using a 90-degree table and a push stick. A push stick keeps my fingers away from the belt and from the heat generated from the belt. Now I use a coarse grit belt for this. I'm using a 36 grit. Coarser grit belts generate less heat and of course remove material a little bit faster. You can also use the contact wheels on both the top and the bottom of a flat platen to get at the curves for the recurve, for the etc. You can add a coil hole with a file. This is a chainsaw file, and that's basically the starting point of the bevel. Now bevels give people the hardest part in making a knife. We use a tilt table. I use a scrap piece of wood that has the centerline scribe for the thickness of the blade that I'm going to use in order to set the angle on the tilt table. Then I start on the actual blank and I keep my eye on those railroad track scribed lines. The tilt table we call it a jig, but it doesn't attach to the blade. It's just a guide. You set the angle and then you hold the blank flat against that table as you pull the knife from left to right. And by using it, it's very easy to achieve some really nice bevels. And I've done entire videos on the tilt table. You can look at the playlist, which will be listed at the tail end of this video, and check out some of our other how-to knife making videos. Once the rough bevels are done, you definitely want to remount the pinholes before you go to heat treating. Now this can be done either before or after you do the bevels. I use a drill press. Notice I've got a big clamp there and a backing plate. Just in case that bit were to bind and spin the blade, that clamp would prevent that blade from helicoptering and possibly causing an injury. Now stainless steel knives are a little bit tricky to heat treat. You need a heat treating oven. They need to be wrapped in stainless steel tool wrap and in a as airtight an envelope as possible, which is what I'm doing here. But don't let that deter you from trying out one of these knife blanks and creating a really nice corrosion-resistant blade for yourself. If you don't have a heat treating oven, there are companies like Peter's Heat Treating that will heat treat 1 or 2 blanks for you. Now they're a little bit more expensive when you're sending limited numbers, but for the guy that's starting out, or for the guy that wants to make an heirloom piece, or one or two really nice stainless steel knives for personal use, absolutely worthwhile. The end result after taking the blades out of the oven is you plate quench them between two aluminum plates to keep the blades nice and flat, and then cool it off with compressed air. And then after this, it goes in for sub-zero quench in dry ice, and then it goes into the oven for tempering, a couple tempering cycles. Now every type of stainless is different. aeb-l, we heat treat 1950 degrees for 15 minutes. We sub-zero quench for 15 to 20 minutes in dry ice, and then the tempering cycles are 395 degrees for 2 hours, and then leave them in the oven, let them cool off in the oven. That's 2 cycles of that. Anyway, on these blades, I wanted a lot of contrast between the surface of the blade and the actual bevel. So I'm going to electro etch the blade surface, and I'm doing this. The positive lead of a car battery charger goes on the knife. The negative lead goes to a piece of angle iron that's wrapped in gauze. And the gauze is dipped in an electrolyte solution. And I've done whole videos on electro etching. I etch these for about 2 minutes a piece. And the end result is a crinkled finish, or a crinkled texture to the blade. So this blade is already heat treated and tempered and now electro etched. Now I'm going to go clean up those preheat treating bevels. I went back to the same tilt table. The angle has never been changed, or has not been changed. And I start with an 80 grit belt, and I'm just going to clean off each side of the bevel until I'm not seeing any of the remaining slag from heat treating, or discoloration from heat treating. And after I do this with the 80 grit belt, I will go back and redo it with a 120 grit belt. And the 120 grit really puts a decent finish. Somebody asked me if you could do false edge on a knife with the tilt table, and you absolutely can. So I threw it into this video. You set a little bit of a steeper angle on the tilt table, and it very easily, very quickly helps you to create a false edge that's even on both sides. You begin to realize how many steps there are to making a knife, or to completing a knife. And starting out with one of these blanks really just gives you a head start on the process. So now we're going to go into mounting the handles. We use what's called the Northgard method, and I'm going to epoxy one side of the scales, or the handle material, onto the blade. This is a 2-part epoxy. It's 24-hour drying, 2 ton. Both surfaces have been prepped. They've been sanded. They've been cleaned off with alcohol to get rid of any grease. And the leading edge, or the forward edge, of the handles themselves have been finished. So they've been shaped the way that I'd like them, and they've been polished, because you won't be able to get at those once they're mounted onto the knife. So I'm going to position the blade exactly where I want it and clamp it into that position. Before I put it aside to dry, I'm going to clean off whatever epoxy gets pushed out of that forward crease. This is kind of important because it's really hard to get the epoxy off after it's dried. Very easy to get it off with a paper towel, and then I soak a little bit of that paper towel in alcohol, and it gets out, gets off all of the epoxy. Now I'm going to use the actual knife blank as a drill guide, and I'm going to drill through the blank and through the handle material. And again, I've got that clamp in place, and I've got a backer board in place that prevents any blowout, especially on wood scales. At this point, you can trim the excess material if you want to. You can use a pin saw, you could use a bandsaw, just to remove some of the extra material. You could also profile those handles just back on the 2x72 with a coarse grit belt. If you let that belt hang off on the right side of the platen, it creates the ability to do a little bit of a curve. So now I'm going to mount the second half of the scales. So same process. You know, I've cleaned everything. I've prepped everything with sanding it lightly, cleaning it with alcohol. I'm going to put epoxy on the scale as well as on the blank. So the blank that I'm holding already has one side of the handles glued to it, epoxy to it, and it has drilled holes through both of those pieces, the first half of the scales as well as the blank. I'm now going to position that second set of side of the handles and really take my time to make sure that that front edge is perfectly aligned with the existing handle that's already in place. Then I clamp it. Then I go through the same process of cleaning off any additional epoxy that got squeezed out during the clamping process, and definitely look over the entire blade and make sure that there's no epoxy from your hands on the blade, and clean that off as well. After it's dried, I'm going to use the existing holes as my drill guide to drill through the entire piece now. So now this drill is going through all three pieces, the handle, the blade, and the handle. It's very easy to insert pins. I'm using stainless steel pins on these. I used an F size drill for a 1/4 inch. It's one size up from a 1/4, so it allows those 1/4 inch pins to get inserted, very easily. I'm then using a coarse grit belt to grind down any pin material that was still protruding from the handles. I'm going to add my 90-degree table back to the 2x72. And at this point, I can finish profiling the handles. I can use a coarse grit belt to do the rough profiling, get rid of the majority of that material, or I could go back to the bandsaw or to the pin saw and cut this off. And I'm really just trying to clean it up to the point where the tang of the knife is completely exposed. So you're just scratching into the blank itself. I use a small wheel attachment to get at those hard to get at diameters, smaller diameters, the finger groove, etc. And then I actually do a lot of the shaping on the handles. Right on the flat platen of a 2x72 by rolling it. You just have to be really careful not to touch the blade to the belt at all. It's very easy to ruin a knife at this point. So I'm just rolling that upper 90-degree angle, just smoothing it all out. I'm also cleaning up any of the horizontal grind lines. I usually do this I start with an 80 grit belt, and then I will go to a 120, and then depending on the knife, if it's a work knife, you might want to stop at 240. If it's a display knife, you would probably want to go a little bit more. With this one, I went to a 240. I then go to an oscillating sander to smooth out all of the rough grinds on the handles. So I shape them as much as I can on the 2x72. I even use the small contact wheel on the bottom of that flat platen to get at some of the inside curves. And then I smooth everything out with an oscillating sander. I do some hand sanding in between usually with 600 and 1,000 grit, sometimes up to 2,000, depending on the material of the handle. And then I go to a buffing wheel with buffing compound. So a lot of different steps. None of them are difficult in themselves, but there is definitely a learning curve involved in making knives. But starting with one of these stainless steel knife blanks definitely gives you a head start in the process. So these are the finished blades from this particular 3-blank build. This is the 7-inch blank. This is the 8-inch blank with the false edge. The crinkled texture from Electro etching. And this is the 9-inch blank. This one has segmented scales. Anyway, I hope you found this video helpful. If you did, I ask that you please give it a thumbs up, subscribe to this YouTube channel, and maybe leave us a comment in the comment section. I'd like to invite you to join us on our Facebook group, Knives and Knife Making. And I'd like to ask you to check out the book that Jason Northgard and I put out last year called Introduction to Knife Making. That can be found on my website, www.bergknifemaking.com, or on amazon.com. Thank you very much.